All right, good morning again.
Good morning.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
All right, keeping in the spirit of collaboration and teamwork, I want to thank Fox for giving me an opportunity just to talk a little bit about the incredible journey that our organization is on in terms of our first and service training. This journey actually began a couple of years ago when we heard that the city of Sumter, can everybody hear me in the back? Okay. When we heard that the city of Sumter, we saw some media coverage, and the city of Sumter was doing what was described as some dynamic and incredible training. And so we were curious. And so we called up and said, hey, what are y'all doing down there in the city of Sumter that's so positive, that's so impactful? And the response kind of surprised us. The response was, come and see. Come and see. We can show you better than we can tell you, is what we got from the city of Sumter. And so 3 of us went down to the city, and we trained with Sumter for 2 consecutive Fridays, myself, Kathy Burlinghoff, and Shauna Gunch. The training was based on the outward mindset framework from the Arbinger Institute. And what happened was the city of Sumter's city council members were on Shaw Air Force Base, and they were exposed to this training, and they said, oh my gosh, we have to take this back to our organization. And so they did. And so Arbinger, the Institute, they train big organizations like General Motors, Staples, the United States Air Force, NASA, Harley-Davidson, just to name a few. And the core concept of the training is an inward and outward mindset. An inward and outward mindset. If I'm inward, my name is Kevin Waits, and I got a job to do, and I want you to either help me do my job or get out of my way. I'm not thinking about what you got to do, Mr. McClure. I don't care what you got to do, Fox. I want to do my job, get out of the way, if I'm inward. If I'm outward, I'm still thinking, I need to get my job done. But I'm also worrying about what I can do to help Ms. Hatley get her job done, what I can do to help Vinny Bettenazzi get his job done, what I can do to help Val and Howard get their job done, right? And so, again, we've all been through extensive training. And just like some other people, I've had a chance to train with people from across the globe, and personally for me, it was the best training I ever attended. Best training I ever attended. And so the story goes, we come back and we share that information with senior staff, and we start talking about it, and we start gaining a little momentum. Long story short, both senior staff and our department heads went through this same training. And we all realized that this training aligned with our first in service philosophy. And so we decided that, hey, we need to have this training for all of our full-time employees throughout the entire organization because we know that it'll make us better. And so we went through the process of rebranding Arbinger's training, of course with their blessing and their approval, and we renamed it our first in service training. After that, we had 5 facilitators get trained to be able to come back and teach the course across the organization. Those 5 facilitators were myself, Kathy Burlinghoff, Shauna Gunch, Vinny Bettenazzi, and Chris Smith. I just want to take a second just to shout them out because it is not easy. It's not easy work. It's not about just showing a PowerPoint and saying, okay, y'all got it. They really pour into people. They really pour into people. So I do want to thank y'all for all of the hard work that y'all do. The future plan is to extend the program, get more facilitators involved so we can go deeper into our organization and possibly pick up the pace. We realized early on that it would be beneficial for us not to just train one department at a time. Start with the fire, go to police, go to public. We knew that it would be important for everybody from across the organization to train together because we all have different perspectives, we all have different challenges. We face many different things from different perspectives every day, but a lot of times we don't know about it unless we communicate. So that was pretty important and big. Some of the progress that we've made so far is 200, along with our department heads and senior staff, over 200 employees have went through this training. Over 200 full-time employees have went through this training. And we want to ensure that all employees get a chance to go through. That is the plan. It builds collaboration, it builds teamwork among the department heads, and not even just the training itself. I do want to thank the department heads because without their cooperation, without them buying in, without them helping us schedule to get their people in the training, it wouldn't happen. And so I thank each and every department head that takes place in helping us and working with Kathy to get the scheduling done, to get it done. The biggest thing about this training is it's not just for work. It is not just for work. We give employees, we invest in employees and give them tools that they can use in their personal lives as well. Some of the key benefits, you get conflict resolution tools. You learn how to deal with conflict. It also makes you a better employee and a better person overall. Some of the tools you walk away, each person walks away with, you end up with a tool to map your conflict, right? To really look at your conflict and say, okay, this is the core of the problem, this is where I am. How am I adding to this conflict? What is my responsibility to the conflict? Like I told you earlier, it's not easy work because each individual has to hold up a mirror and look in it. And we don't always like what we see. It's tough work, but we've been going through it. Another tool is called the influence pyramid that teaches you a step-by-step strategy to build relationships. Another tool is Meet to Give, where I want to meet with Mr. Louder. And I'm not just showing up with my hand out. I don't want something, but I want to meet with Mr. Louder because I have an idea or a strategy that I believe that can help him do his job better. And the final tool I wanted to mention is just a tool called Meet to Learn. Meet to Learn. I want to meet with Diana. I want to find out, tell me what you do. Tell me more. Help me understand your challenges, your objectives, your perspective. Because if I can understand what you're going through, I can figure out ways to try to help you. So those are some of the tools that come along with this training. Moving forward, of course, like I said, we want to have additional facilitators to pick up the pace and expose all of our employees to this transformational training. We sit, as facilitators, we sit in a room and we are blessed to be able to see the magic happen. We are blessed that we've had people come back and say, hey, this not only helped me at work, but it helped me with my wife. This helped my marriage. This helped me understand my kids a little bit better. We've seen the magic as in a breakout session, two people from two different departments spend 10 minutes during a breakout session and they come back and all of a sudden they have a program outline that they can use to help kids in the community. We've seen the magic happen when we bring these people in from across the organization and we realize that two people in the class went to the same high school in another state and didn't even know it. So it's really been beneficial to our employees. One of the major things that drives the program is our employees. We take feedback. At one session, we take time and we say, hey, what are we doing right? What do we need to do different? How can we help shape this program to better fit you? And because of that, initially when we started out, each cohort was 10 sessions. We got a little pushback, not pushback, but feedback from our teammates saying, hey, 10 is too many. 10 is too many. What can we do different? And so we scaled it back. We increased the time limit of each session, but we scaled it back and cut it down to 5 sessions for each cohort. So employee feedback has been very important. I can rant and rave about this program all day long. I can talk about it all day long because there's so many positive things, but I thought it would be important for you to hear firsthand from some of our employees.
My career, I've done a lot of different leadership trainings, and this one was the one I enjoyed the most. I felt like I really was able to contribute because it was a hands-on, interactive, not just PowerPoint, here, take this book and take it with you. You got to learn as you went and interact.
First and service training is going very well. I've only been to one class so far, but I am still very excited. The first class was mainly about changing your mindset, and that's something that we all can do. Your mindset, I think, is the foundation of everything. And if you know me, you know I'm usually pretty quiet, but in my first class, I felt safe enough to open up and speak to the class about some of my experiences, and I can't wait to go to class tomorrow.
In my nearly 28 years with the city of Myrtle Beach, I've taken all kinds of different training, and this was absolutely the best training I've ever received. It is also the only training that I thought was applicable to every single employee, from a part-time new hire to the city manager. Everybody could get something out of it.
I used some of the things that we read from the classes almost immediately during the class. So after the class, it was kind of easy to kind of do. It kind of opened me up a little bit to kind of be more of a better employee, a better co-worker, a team player. So it was very enlightening.
What I really loved about the first and service training is it forced me out of my hustle and bustle of my position and and really honed in on the people of the city and my coworkers and our attitudes towards each other. There was a lot of times that I had only known people by email addresses, and there were a few in that class that I actually formed faces to names, and then I built friendships with them.
The main takeaway, which a year later for me, that outward mindset still resonates. So I've taken that with me anytime I'm in another office, another department, another part of the city. Something that's really stuck with me. So anytime you can do training that kind of the core bullet point, core message sticks with you a year later, I think that speaks really highly of the program.
All right. And I do thank our creative services team for capturing those testimonials for me. Great job. I thank you for that. In addition to everything I said, at the end of each course, every teammate gets a certificate of completion along with a first in service pendant. I think I put right in front of your seats for our council members this morning. But that's it for me. I'll answer any questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
Kevin, the training, everybody seems to, really benefit from it. But what I found over my career, before I got here, is that, we need to have a consistent way to do what I call to inspect what you expect. So you have the training, it's impactful, but what are the follow-ups down the road so that it just becomes almost natural to you?
Okay, good question. The follow-up is what we're doing is each teammate has access or will have access to a portal of updated webinar trainings, updated trainings, period. In addition to that, we're figuring out ways to incorporate these values into HR, right? We started at our orientation. A part of this training is introduced to new employees as they come in the door. But we're looking forward, and that was one of our major concerns from the beginning before we even decided to do the training, the sustainability.
Kevin, how long does it take for the entire course?
It is 5 sessions. It normally takes maybe close to a month because we try not to meet every week, so we stagger it every other week, but it's 5 total sessions for each cohort, lasting about 3 hours per session.
Is there a way to detail this type of training, even if it's scaled to some level for city council? Because we work together as a team, but sometimes we only see each other 3 times a month.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. If y'all desire this training, we can make it happen. We can find a way to make it happen.
Make it happen.
Any other questions or comments from anybody? All right, thank you.
Right now, we got to get into the meat of the matter with Michelle, and she suggested if anybody wants a quick, we can get outside, but I think one's ready, but we can roll right into it. If everyone needs a restroom break, we should be good. We're about to get into it pretty good here for the next hour and a half. You get us fired up, Patrick?
I couldn't tell you.
Like, why don't we do it next week?
The screen or?
I'm fine with that. Yeah, I'll email him and say, can you do it next week?
Tell them I've already signed up for another call around noon.
Okay.
Just be better.
We have workshop on April 1st.
We do.
All right, good morning. I'm glad everyone now is awake. I hope you're fully caffeinated. We're in for a ride. If you will notice here on the top of the screen, what is money? My predecessor, Mike Shelton, who I think was probably one of the smartest people I know, my mentor, used to start every budget with a presentation called What is Money? This is actually the first page of his presentation that he did right here in Panopolis in 2006, believe it or not, almost 20 years ago. Mike's presentations were comprehensive. You know, he was an educator at heart, and his intention was to educate you on the ins and outs of the budget from beginning to end before he began to talk about the budget. And I know the people say, don't tell me what you're going to tell me, just tell me. But Mike liked to be thorough. And I think there were a lot of things that were really important about what Mike did. He wanted to start by defining money and what is money. You know, it's a medium of value, a store of value, and a unit of account. And he also once said it is the fifth song on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon album. That was Mike's sense of humor. He would define a budget as a financial plan. He would go on to talk about the authoritative guidelines of how we build a budget, whether it's common ethics, just the basics of good financial planning, the Government Financiers Officers Association, the Government Accounting Standards Board, local laws and ordinances, and the state law. You might think, you know, why is this important? Because really, the same tenets and goals that Mike had when he was trying to give this presentation, we still have today. The same basics for building a budget, we still follow today. Our main goal is to maintain the financial resiliency to provide continuity of high-quality service, municipal services. When he talked about the principles of budgeting, I think it's important because you're going to see this throughout all of this presentation. You're going to recognize this when I go through each slide and talk about the different revenues. It's important to have a good revenue mix. That means matching funding sources with the appropriate expenditures. If I'm going to have an expenditure that is recurring, police services, salaries, those kind of things, I need to make sure that the revenue that I match that with is also recurring and dependable and steady. We need to utilize user charges to finance services that are price excludable. And what that means is like water and sewer, parking, or solid waste. Even some of the things we charge for, like programs and recreation. If you don't want to participate in those things, you don't pay. You might not be able to opt out of water service, but you control your usage, that type of thing. That way that what you're doing is you're charging the people who are using it and not impacting our ad valorem property tax across the board for everyone who may not be that same level of user of that service. Competitiveness. We need to balance our recurring revenues against recurring expenses. And we need to isolate
volatile revenues and devise ways to direct them out of the operating budget. That's why when we talk about the tourism development fee and the hospitality tax and the accommodations tax and how we use those, that we're kind of careful that we're not dedicating 100% of those revenues to recurring expenses. They're volatile. And then we also, in competitives, need to maintain benchmark data on tax and fee revenue. You'll see when our folks come up and they talk about the taxes or the fees that they're going to propose increasing, they're also going to talk about our neighboring communities and even in some cases, you know, other companies or whatever that compete with us for those services and how we compare. Often we fare very well and our rates are lower. And then service continuity, another one of those principles. We've got to maintain fund balances that they're adequate to meet our working capital needs and establish reasonable amounts for contingencies. Finally, capital resources. We want to seek to find new pay-as-you-go sources so that we can pay cash for our capital expenditures, maintain the appropriate credit ratings and debt ratios, and position ourselves to take advantage of debt refunding opportunities. All those things save money and allow us to be able to do more with the same level of resources that we have. Then Mike would go on to talk about, do we have money? Yes, we have money, but the yeah but. You know, there's always a but. We have money, but we know that 2025 is a reassessment year in property taxes. What does that typically mean? After a reassessment year, you're not going to typically see the same level of growth in property tax revenue that you might see in other years because you've gone and you've had this big jump in value. You've grabbed all the value in that one year. So growth kind of slows in that first year, and then it may pick back up, you know, over the subsequent years up until the time you do another reassessment. Then it sort of stabilizes again. Our tourism-driven revenues, we've already talked about the fact that they are normalizing, stabilizing. That means we're not going to continue to see that level of growth. It's not a bad thing. It is an expected thing. But that is just another factor that we used when we were building this budget. Other issues. We've got a tight employment market. Mr. Finney talked about that. Fox mentioned it. We provide services, and over 70% of our operating budgets are for services. That's what we do. With a 5% market increase, wage inflation is moderating, but we still have to be able to compete in that market, retain and recruit folks to provide the services, those high-quality services that we continue to want to provide. Our health insurance costs, Marla touched on that, Fox touched on that. We're trending 30% higher this year than expected. Talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. And then finally, inflation in general. Predicted to be 1.9% this year, 1.8% next year. But, there's the but again, but we also know tariffs are an issue. We also know that inflation and rising costs do not hit every sector of what we do equally. Let's look at capital projects. Capital projects have grown unbelievably. It's more than doubled on some projects, water and sewer in particular, over just the last few years. Don't really expect it to go down. We're hoping it doesn't continue to grow at the same rate, but I don't expect to see any drops in those costs in the near term. Those are the things that we're facing. I talked about all that because I think it's important to talk about how we arrived at these numbers. It's not just a matter of building a trend line, looking at something, oh, we spent this over the last 5 years, so we expect it's going to grow at the same rate. We expect it's going to do the same thing. There's a lot more going into this budget than just simply a few statistical calculations and dropping in a number. As we said, it's intentional, and now you know sort of what we're thinking, what our basis was before we even began to put the numbers together. And here we have the proposed budget. You can see that our operating increase is only 7% proposed. In governmental operations, that's 6.9, and in enterprise, that's 7.9. Overall budget is only expected to grow by 9.4%. with a capital project increase of 10.4 million. Ooh. We've already talked a little bit about this. No proposed property tax increase, no proposed rate increase for the convention center, no proposed business license increase. All right, we talked about competitiveness, keeping us in line with our competitors and maintaining, stability for our taxpayers, right there. We are proposing a minor adjustment of building permit fees. Now with that one, I just want to say that's kind of a matching principle there. Not just competitiveness, but matching. Because when we talk about the building permit fee, you'll see a little bit more there about why it's being changed. Competitive and matching when it comes to the planning and zoning fees. The competitive bringing us along, with the rates of our competitors because we are behind in many of those. And we want to match the cost of those services with the effort that it takes to provide them. We're proposing the 3.5% increase in solid waste, the 9% in water and sewer, and the stormwater fee increase of 22%. Those are still based on the rate studies that were done. I think in water and sewer and stormwater were probably on near the last year in that study. Solid waste was done just last year, I think, Janet. They're going to talk to you a little bit more about those, the specifics of those increases in the next presentation. Oh, I did want to point out that overall, all of those increases for water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste only equate to $9.84 a month for a payer, which is $118 a year. We've already kind of talked about this. Yes?
That's for residential, correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, how does that affect people what would be that rate increase for, say, like someone who rents houses or rents buildings or whatever? What would that rate be?
We're gonna get to it. It's on a slide when Janet talks about it.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
We've already talked about a lot of this. The rate of inflation expected to be 1.8 this year, 1.9 next year. Tight employment, moderate growth in some of our revenue sources. I'll point out the housing market, the ABC report, housing market is stuck until 2026. Now we know here in Myrtle Beach that sometimes things are different in Horry County, different than what you see on a national level. We do know that we're not making more land, so there are only so many more developments or apartment complexes that can be built. So at some point, that's really going to drop even more. Property tax rate. We always like to talk about where we fall in comparison with many of our neighbors here in the state. Like Fox said yesterday, we are among the lowest as far as property tax millage in the state when you factor in the tourism development fee credit. We're pretty low without it, but when you factor in that tourism development fee credit, we are right now the lowest of these other. I did look through like every municipal taxing entity yesterday, and I mean there are a very small handful that actually do have lower millage rates than us. They're not up here because they're not comparable.
What's the difference between, what's the math between Mount Pleasant and Myrtle Beach there? 15 mils?
Yep,
Big number.
it is.
Mount Pleasant, that's good.
Right. And if you think about Mount Pleasant, I'll guarantee you that their property values are much higher than ours. All right, now to get into the various funds. Our governmental funds are the traditional governmental services that you would consider. Our general fund, debt service, capital projects, and then special revenue funds. Now, special revenue funds are funds where we segregate specific revenue sources and tie those specific revenue sources to the required or restricted uses of those sources of revenue. The Air Force Base TIF and the oceanfront TIF are great examples. We collect taxes in those areas that can only be used for expenses in those areas. They can only be used to serve that TIF district. Your hospitality fee, A-tax, those things, those revenues are restricted for specific uses. By placing them in segregated funds, we're able to track and manage how they're spent and ensure that they're spent correctly. The major governmental funded increases are listed here for you, and I'll just talk about a few of the really big ones. Like we said, salary and benefits. If the governmental operations only went up 6.9%, and we have a 5% merit or market increase this year, naturally the largest growth is going to be in salary and benefits at 5.7%. The transfers, that is where we actually transfer some of those tourism-driven revenues into our operating funds to offset costs of operated associated with hosting the number of tourists that we have here in Myrtle Beach. Say policing. We always talk about the fact that we would not need a police department or even a fire department of the size that we have if we were only a 35 to 40,000 population community. But since our population might grow to 150, 250,000 a day when the tourist season, we have to have a much stronger and larger police force. We use those tourism-driven revenues to offset that cost. That goes back to that matching principle that I talked about at the beginning in our principles of budgeting. We try to match those tourism revenues with the costs that are driven by the services needed by our tourists. The next tier is our fleet lease. You all know that we have been trying to fund up the take-home program for our police department, so that's a contributor. Another contributor is just the escalation of cost of vehicles. They've gone up. Another factor is the fact that when we look at the fire department and their apparatus, we have to order that about 3 years in advance to be able to get it on site. So we put money away and go ahead and fund it in advance, knowing that it's going to take that for us to get it on the yard by the time we need it. So those are the factors that contribute to the increase in the fleet lease. And one other is the vacancy variance. How that is an increase in expenses is actually a decrease in the offset that we put in our budget to account for the fact that we know all of our positions will not be filled 100% of the year. It would be irresponsible to try to budget them as if they were, because it would there would be opportunity cost associated with that. Well, we are recognizing currently that our vacancy rate has gone down. Our police department, I think it was at 70-some positions vacant last year. It's only 50-some now. So what we're doing is actually working, and we cannot continue to assume a $3 million vacancy variance. So we've cut that in half, and $1.5 million is where we think we can safely assume that variance this year. Debt service, you know that we had a number of debt issues this year for the convention center of the A&I district, those projects. And the others are just minor. I've listed out there. Janitorial cost has just gone through the roof lately. We have been contemplating and continue to contemplate. Do we bring it in-house? Do we go out to bid again? We've already gone out to bid twice, and this is the best we could do, but we have to maintain our facilities.
Michelle,
Yes.
let me ask you, how do you, seem like to me, I mean, all this uncertainty, and how do you plan for if you have to replace say a police car, a fire truck, when you start thinking about this stuff going on in DC with the tariffs and all this, and, you know, I saw something where it said that if you wanted to replace a SUV, you might look at a $20,000 increase. How do you?
That's a good question.
And we talk about no tax increase.
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, we have our fleet manager, and they're Joey. Joey's doing a great job. So Joey's going to look at these vehicles, and when he tells us we need to replace it, we're really going to need to replace it. And if we can push it off a year, if that car is good enough, it's not going to cost us more to keep than to sell, we'll do that. The other thing that has us in a really good position right now is those strong hospitality fee and tax balances that we've talked about. That strong general fund balance that we've talked about. If we're in a position we've got to replace that vehicle, then that's what we're going to do. And then what we'll do is we'll look at some of the other projects that we're funding with those revenue sources and say, you know what, maybe we need to push that out. It's time to prioritize then what those capital expenditures are going to be. But it all goes back to that importance of having those strong balances, that resiliency to be able to face it come what may.
I think just to add on to that, using fleet as a specific example, we do have a phenomenal fleet team, and if they end up having, again, to Michelle's point, it's a cost benefit.
Yeah.
If it's cheaper for us to fix it than replace it, we'll fix it. Well, historically, we know what our replacement schedule is. We may end up having to repair them longer now instead of replacing them just because of the cost. But that goes to a lot of things. It's not just fleet. I mean, it's HVAC systems, it's buildings, it's same philosophy applied across the board. So we may end up being in a position where we're repairing stuff more than replacing it. If costs get too out of line.
Michelle, Brian, under fleet lease and just looking at transportation vehicles, in the consumer market, if you lease a vehicle, you're going to lease it for X amount of time based on X amount of mileage. And at the end of that, there will be a residual value assigned to that particular product. Would we be in a position that, to use Mr. Chestnut's example of all of a sudden we need to replace an SUV and it's an extra $20,000 that nobody knew about or nobody could budget for? Do we look at, as Brian talked about, sometimes it's cheaper to fix it than replace it. Do we look at possibly going ahead and purchasing the vehicle at its stated residual value based on market conditions and then writing that off during the next 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it might be? Are those things that we take into consideration?
Absolutely. And we have done that before, right? We do try to treat this program much like you're talking about with a lease program. And believe it or not, we talked with the Enterprise a few years ago and looked at their model. We just decided with the fleet manager we could manage it better, more efficiently, and economically. So absolutely.
Would now be a time to ask about the grants and stuff, or you want to talk about that?
Anytime.
No, I know Ms. Brooke, and she's always done a great job of searching out and getting grants. And are we seeing a slowdown on grants that we've already applied for?
Yes.
And then is there?
So we have holds on all Department of Homeland Security grants that we have right now. So our firefighter personnel grants, they're not paying out any drawdowns on that, and our SHISHUP grants that fund the INC training.
What was the last balance on that, Brooke? Was it, I think the last I saw was what, 966,000. Have we drawn down some of that before the hold?
They're holding it.
That 966, right? And see, a portion of that was for this year, and I think there was about the first quarter of 3/4 of 2026 that would have been available. So. Things like that are one of the other reasons why we felt it prudent to reduce the vacancy variance and not count on, those savings and salary budgets.
And to
Right.
Just,
It's a concern.
Yes.
It's going to be a concern going forward. We have a lot of CDBG, $450,000. What's going to happen there? I don't think we've heard anything with CDBG.
We haven't heard anything with CDBG. Other kind of federal pass-through grants, they have said that they have their money and they will continue paying out, but we haven't heard anything from CDBG or Department of Justice.
We got a little scare, I think, earlier, if I'm correct me wrong, with the $10 million water grant that we had. It was scorched. Did they put a pause on that and let it go?
They've had their money since 2020.
I think that was our concern. Was
We were concerned about that one. The
Yes.
$10 million water line was a biggie.
Oh, yeah.
So, real big one.
And that's the worry. I mean, how do you plan for stuff and you count on these grants and
It's important to have a strong fund balance and have a lot of cash in the bank to be able to adjust and buy. A lot of smaller things are not going to be as apt as maybe will be.
The one certainty when you're putting together a budget is that you're completely uncertain. The guarantee is that your revenues are going to come in higher or lower than what you budget, and your expenses are going to come in higher or lower than what you budget. That is always going to be the case. Except I think that one time when Mike Shelton, I'll bring him up again, budgeted the first year of the TDF tax almost to the penny. Yeah, and that's just a rare thing. And that's why, yeah, right?
Mike was good, though. Mike was good.
The,
Mike was really good.
he was, and he got a little lucky that, he'll tell you too, he got a little lucky that year too.
Yeah, Mike was sharp with that.
Yep. And again.
So is Michelle.
Well, thank you. Trained by a good man.
Mike Chestnut talked about fleets and everything. One thing we got to keep in mind, and then look at Tom and Vinny and Brad, is the fire apparatus lead time. What are we at, Tom, 36 months for a fire truck now?
So we executed a contract in November, and it was 48 to 50-month delivery estimate, so.
And there's nothing, there's like, three manufacturers in the country, or?
Yeah.
And is that at a locked-in price?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so when we signed the contract, that's what the price is, but obviously, they're projecting out what the cost of the equipment and parts are gonna be 3-4 years from now when they go to construction, so I'm sure that's included.
It's
Which vehicles do we lease and which ones do we own?
We're not leasing any anymore. I've finally gotten us away from actually doing leases for those apparatus, and that's why we're funding them the way that we are in advance. Lori, what is it, 1.4 million we put aside a year now?
We had increased to 1.6 this year.
1.6 million a year to be able to pay in advance for the fire apparatus, but we're not paying any interest on a lease to do that. When we talk about a lease program, it is our own internal self-operated lease program.
So we're not leasing from the manufacturer or the manufacturer's
No.
captive bank?
No.
We already own it. It's just a matter of what the replacement cycle is. I mean, to say fleet lease is a little bit of a misnomer.
It is a fleet replacement program.
Okay. That's better, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense for us to keep them and maintain them.
Yeah.
If we got to maintain them all.
Thank you. Learn something every day.
All right, this is just a lot of information about the projected governmental revenues and expenses. As you can see, revenues at $333 million, expenditures $333 million. The only service level change included in governmental fund budgets this year is in stormwater at $142,000. That was actually contemplated. Actually, we've had more service level changes contemplated when that rate study and operational study were done, and this is among the first that we've added. We wanted to make sure that we had adequate funding, and then the other thing is that the cost of projects has escalated so much that we've had to really be careful about increasing the cost in the stormwater fund. And then when you only look at operating expenses, and consider the TDF transfer to the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce, have that removed. Public safety expenditures represent nearly 50% of all governmental operating expenses. Before I move on, anybody got any questions about these? Okay. We keep talking about the importance of fund balance, how it offers us that resiliency. Our projected governmental fund balances for 2026 are listed here. Our tourism revenue funds are projected to have a $43.7 million fund balance at year end. Now, naturally, that's going to depend on how close our estimates are, but I wouldn't think it would be too far off from this. We're still going to end up with healthy fund balances at year end. Our other special revenue funds, the Convention Center, Sports, Tourism, Whispering Pines, Baseball Stadium, all of those, there you're going to end up with about a $73 million fund balance. This one's a little bit different because I want to point something out. The fund balances in a lot of these funds, take the Myrtle Beach Air Force Base, TIF, for example. That is being accumulated for two things. It's being accumulated for the capital projects that were agreed upon back in 2020-21, and it's being accumulated to pay off the debt early, hopefully by FY 28-29. Right now, we're on track to do that. So with that fund, that's not money that is just sitting there. We're not just accumulating funds in the airbase TIF, because we all know that having a certain level of fund balance and in reserve sitting there is a good thing. Having an excess, not so much. That's not an excess. It's there for a purpose and accumulating for a purpose. The stormwater fund is the same. You see the $31 million there. You may say, well, why are you talking to me about increasing stormwater fees by 22%? You got $31 million sitting there. Well, we're in the middle of a project that's costing over $30 million just to get the ocean side of that deepwater outfall constructed. We've seen the pictures we talked about. We still have to deal with the landward side. So this is fun. The majority of these, they're going to be spent. And spent for a good reason. But they're not just sitting there accumulating. The oceanfront TIF, a lot of that is the same thing. That is project balances, funding sitting there to continue to finish projects. The Convention Center fund balance, fortunately, it's there for some operating and some projects as well. Hope we'd like to get to a point where the Convention Center uses less and less of a supplement of tourism dollars, but that'll be a while coming. Questions? All right, tourism-driven revenue. We keep talking about these. And really, we keep talking about them because they are such a big part of funding our operations and our capital and supporting tourism-related services. I've got some information here on some projections. We've talked about the fact that the TDF is down 1.5%, hospitality 3.3%, and ATAX 3.4%. I am still going to predict some growth for next year. And I'll tell you why. I've said it a number of times, and I still believe it, and it has rung true for as long as I've worked in government. The city of Myrtle Beach is not recession, pandemic, or natural climatological event resistant, but we are resilient. We're a driving destination. We're cheaper than Disney. And even when everyone else slows down, people still typically want to come to Myrtle Beach. It might be for a shorter stay, and they might eat in their hotel room instead of, eating at Trebenio or Hook and Barrel or any of the other wonderful restaurants we have around. But people are going to come. And when I think about what's happening in North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee, I think back to Hurricane Sandy, and I think about what it did to New Jersey. After that, we had one of our bigger summers ever because we were that alternative spot. And I think when you talk about Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge, whether they're able to open or not, you always have that perception, that's the fear that, oh, well, maybe we better not go there this year. Well, we're that next alternative. And I have a feeling that, we'll get some of that vacation. Even though we'll lose some who now are unable to vacation, we will gain some. I think Chris Finney said that, had the chart, as personal disposable income is still at like 4.5%. I think we're predicting it go to 4.3, 3.8. That's still disposable personal income, which means people are going to vacation. All right, how do we use those tourism revenues? How do we use them to offset the cost of the tourism? How do we match those revenues to the appropriate expenditures? Here we go. I'm not going to read off where all of these go, but at the bottom line, the key and the most important thing to pay attention to is this: how we use them. $31.3 million in transfers of hospitality accommodations tax revenues are used for operating. What that means is they fund debt service in our debt service fund for projects that are eligible. What that means is $15 million goes to the general fund of hospitality tax to offset the cost of police, fire, some beach maintenance that is tourism driven. Local accommodations tax money goes to the general fund to offset especially the cost of the beach services and events and things that are paid for out of our general fund. Hospitality fees go into the general fund to offset the cost of capital. Those fire trucks that we talk about funding in advance, the program where we're doing the take-home vehicles for the police department, that's hospitality fee funded. Because we're a little bit more restricted with hospitality fee. We can only pay for capital with that. With hospitality tax, we can cover some operating. Stepping outside of the general fund with the hospitality tax, that also supplements revenue in the sports tourism fund, the convention center, the sports center, convention center, baseball, golf, of course, the performing arts theater, any of those other funds that basically serve tourism building functions or tourism serving functions, we use that to offset the cost, which keeps us from having to raise property taxes or use our business license revenues to keep those going. Why is that important? Because bringing tourists here supports our business community. And capital, the other big one with capital, not only does it support the capital in the general fund for your police cars and your fire trucks and those types of things, it's a big, big source of revenue in our capital projects fund. It allowed us to build to renovate the golf course. It's going to allow us to do, it allowed us to really cover the additional cost for Fire Station number 3 that we talked so much about. In the tax increment fund, we only had like $4 million originally budgeted to cover that cost. And with the way things were going, they ballooned and almost doubled, but we were able to pay cash with the hospitality fees and tax combined without having to go and borrow any money to do that. It'll help us to expand the boardwalk over to the over beyond Plyler Park. We renovated the boardwalk, the majority of the boardwalk, but from Plyler Park north, we still have some work to do. We can do that with cash without borrowing. Those are the types of things. Some of our recreation facilities, Savannah's Playground and that, the splash pad at McLeod, and the expansion of McLeod Park. We can do so much in our community and in that capital projects, all because of the hospitality taxes and fees. And we'll talk more about those tomorrow. All right, the general fund revenue base. We've already kind of talked about this, but I think it just bears repeating because sometimes it can get lost on all of us how important tourism is to our economy and how much it actually does support our operation. In the general fund, property tax, business license, and tourism transfers represent 77.9% of our total revenue base. We talked a little bit about the building permit revenue and how it's begun to stabilize. We're budgeting it for it to be 55% higher than what was collected in 2024, but 24 was pretty low. Now, that's a strong estimate, but we'll be monitoring it like we do everything else. Let's see how it comes in. I've talked to Chris, and he sees a few commercial things coming online before too long, so that's what we're hoping. Expenditures. Already said it, but it bears repeating. Personal services is the biggest area of expenditures. 73.8% of general fund expenditures are for personal services. The operating 24.2% and capital only 1.8%. Of that, public safety accounts for 59.3% of the total expenditures in the general fund, including capital. While we didn't include any service level changes in the general fund this year, we did include a number of capital outlay items. You know, council has talked about the importance of technology for public safety. So we do have a number of technology items. It's really important to maintain the assets that we have. If we don't maintain them now, they'll cost us more later. For that, you'll see in building maintenance, we've got a truck and a trailer to allow those folks to transport equipment to different places, particularly maybe for beach walkovers or any other big project that they're working on. We're always having to replace the load and pack dumpsters and buy a few lawnmowers for our Parks and Rec and our right-of-way folks and our litter folks every year. While not an organized replacement plan like you see with our fleet, we do sort of do an informal replacement plan through the capital outlay. Any questions about capital outlay? In the convention center, we're recommending a golf cart. They use it quite often internally and externally. So one golf cart, sports tourism fund, they need some electrical upgrades at the sports center. And in the stormwater fund, they've asked for a dump trailer.
Michelle, can we just go back 1 minute? I'm just curious on the golf cart, $10,000. Is that a retail price?
For a brand new one, yes, sir.
Okay, so we're not actively negotiating with the manufacturer or a local provider for a municipal government cost versus a normal retail?
When we go to actually purchase that, what he could do is turn that over to Ann in purchasing. And she manages that sort of negotiation. She knows where to go and what state contracts might provide. So she's our resource there.
We will always go through.
Yeah. And it would be a lot, yeah. We would flood Ann. And if we were to try to go through her to create estimates and everything right through the budget process, we would have Ann flooded and overwhelmed, and she wouldn't be able to do her day-to-day. So often what we do is our best estimate here, and then if it even gets approved in the budget, then Ann steps in. All right, now to our enterprise funds. Those are our funds that operate like a business. Those, when I talked about using user charges where we can to fund operations as opposed to relying on property taxes that are spread across the whole populace where they use it or not, those are our enterprise funds. The increases in the enterprise fund expenditures or the budget this year, we actually have an increase in retained earnings as a part of that. There's an increase in the cost of wholesale water and sewer. You can see Grand Strand Water and Sewer is, as they normally do, implementing their own rate increase, which passes through to us and then in turn gets passed through to our customers. System repairs and maintenance. Some of that may be due to the age of the system, but other is cost of components to maintain and repair our system. Fleet replacement, it's a theme, and then salary and benefits. We actually have landfill tipping fees going down, and there were some savings in the insurance allocation. Last year when we estimated insurance, it was a good bit higher than when it actually came in. We were very fortunate. When we get our insurance estimates, they're extremely preliminary and months out from actually knowing the actual insurance rate. So we did recognize some savings there, which was a good thing. The recommended budget, $62.8 million. Of that, water and sewer enterprise, the net assets are estimated to increase to $121 million. The solid waste budget are to end at $4.2 million and parking utility at $2.6 million. So basically they are expected to increase 2.2% over FY25. Naturally, the water and sewer operations are our biggest enterprise fund. We do have some capital outlay that is planned for the water and sewer fund, $20,000 to add a dump body to and upgrade one vehicle, and a pickup truck with a mounted crane. Now, what our folks in water and sewer plan to do, and why they've asked for this, is they want to take some of the work in-house that they currently contract. This would give them the equipment to do that, which means, expected response times when something happens, water line breaks or there's an issue with a water pipe or sewer pipe. Our folks have the equipment to immediately respond. Hopefully that also means reduced cost as well, without having to hire an outside contractor to address any issues that arise. We've talked a couple of times about what ifs. What if the grants don't come in? What if the tariffs drive up the prices? What if the tourists aren't able to come? What if the revenue's down more than what we thought? We've got some tried and true strategies for dealing with that. We're going to continually monitor all of these revenues, all of these expenses. If we see that the revenue's not coming in, if it's not turning out like we hope, we're going to freeze capital spending first. Then we're going to freeze vacancies. We're going to reduce temporary and part-time employment, and we'll freeze non-essential operating expenses. Now, I don't like to even use that term non-essential because it sounds like we're out there spending money on things that we don't need, when that's not the case. When I say non-essential, it means, maybe you don't buy a 50-pack of notepads or 10 cases of paper. Maybe you limit it. Maybe you don't replace your pens, or maybe the computer replacement plan, instead of an estimated 4 to 5 years, we've got to run them along a little bit more. Maybe we don't buy that new software that we wanted to upgrade to this year but plan for it next year. So it's not that there are expenses out there that are non-essential. It's that they can be delayed more than anything else.
Is it more
Now,
like needs versus wants?
there are some that are needs versus wants, like I want my department to have all new uniforms this year. Now, naturally, we could do without that. But if I need a new printer, because mine is broken and is not working, or I need a new computer because it's completely just shut down.
And that's essential for the operation.
Correct. Now, do we think it's important for our folks to have shirts and uniforms that show that they work for the city? Or even better yet, that our guys on the ground have steel-toed boots so that they're protected and safe, and reflective gear, bulletproof vests, and all of those, absolutely. But you don't necessarily have to have 10 polo shirts with the city logo. All right, let's go back. So if revenues are impacted to a lesser degree, if we bring in more revenue than we expected, you always look first to continue to build reserves to manage the future economic disruptions. And that's a lot of what we've seen in the last couple of years when we had those revenues that came in at such, unprecedented rates. We could implement service level changes identified as priorities. Fox already kind of gave you the list of what he would like to see implemented if we're able to have the available revenue to do that. Or we could escalate our capital outlay and capital improvement projects with the available funds. If there are some projects that we really wanted to see moved up or happen quicker, or even to a larger scale or degree, that's the perfect option when you're talking about revenues that came in at a higher level, because more than likely they're more volatile and there's no guarantee of them recurring. Now the two big challenges. Health insurance. A few years back, we were in a situation where our health insurance fund was in the negative, and it was in the negative for a few years. And thanks to this council, and thanks to the economy and the fund balances that we had, we were able to shore those up and get them in order. What we saw last year was an increase in claims for 24. It's not unusual, because with health insurance, what you'll typically see is you'll see a high claim year. You might see 2 high claim years. But then normally what you see is a drop, because you may have had a cancer patient, or probably multiple. Someone with back problems, knee surgery, or illnesses that either are resolved in a year or two, a plan year or two, or the person's no longer in the plan because maybe they're not working here anymore. So you'll see up and down in your health insurance claims normally. And I've looked at that over a 20-year pattern, and that's what you see. A couple of high years, a couple of really low years. So it's almost impossible to predict just a trend other than to think, well, I've had a couple of high years, I really should have a low year. Unless there's something in the medical industry that's just really changed. And right now there hasn't. So for 2024, we had a year that was higher than the previous 2. Did not really expect 2025 to go even higher. But we're seeing right now a 30% increase in the medical claims compared to last year. What that means is we are probably going to end with a deficit in 25 unless something changes just drastically for the whole last part of the year. If things change, maybe we'll see a little bit less of a deficit. And when we close out 25, that's something that we'll talk about, whether or not we have reserves strong enough to go ahead and shore that up. When we're talking to our consultants, and if you look at it strictly from a last year standpoint, you would trend 26's claims up another 30%. I don't recommend doing that right now. We don't have enough information, and that's not the typical pattern that we see. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's just not what we normally experience. So when we leave here, we're going to go back and we're going to continue to work with our consultants, and we're going to continue to pull information and try to determine what we need to do with the insurance fund this year. It may be a matter of recommending rate increases that we could maybe implement in January of the year. We just don't know yet, but all I can say is more to come. Stay tuned. We just want to make sure that you're aware, as soon as we're aware of the condition of any of these funds.
Are we potentially at a point where all of us in this room are going to have to contribute something rather than having it provided, contribute something out of our compensation?
That is not off the table. That is part of what we will be doing, working with Kathy and her team and Kevin, is looking at all of the options, whether or not we're still benefiting from being self-insured. Are we? Is it time for employees to contribute? How much do rates need to go up? So nothing's off the table with what we're going to be looking at and what we're going to be working with our consultants with over the next 6 months before the January, new deductible year rolls around. All right, the other challenge is the tourism development fee. What I have here is just sort of a history, and you can see back in, 2020, the tourism development fee revenue was not, that the 20% was not sufficient to cover the tourism development fee credits that were applied to 4% property owners' tax bills. We froze the credit at that point. I forget what we went to, but it landed on 67.45%, I believe. And we've been there, and it's worked up until this point. This year, I believe that we will again, the credit will outpace the revenue available to cover it. 4% property is growing at double digits every year. When I worked with our assessor, and I got him to give me a list of 4% property by district, and I was a little bit shocked because on the Air Force Base TIF, that whole area, 52.8% of the total real property assessed value total is 4% property owner. Citywide, it averages out to about 28% of total real property. That's commercial residential, and residential 4%. So it's all of it. So we're right now at about 28% as a whole. I think when we started out, we were at 24%, but we had a lot less assessed value and we had a lot less houses when we started out. So it is growing exponentially. And it's growing at a faster rate than the revenue. Had we not had this huge bump in revenue, we would have already been back in the hole. I am very conservatively predicting a $1.4 million deficit for next year. And honestly, when you look at the tax credit revenue for 25 that I've got listed, that $9,782,560, that's the credit that's already been given through February. We're already at that point, and there'll be a little bit more to come. So that deficit there will grow. Now, the balance. The saving grace is we do get some interest in the fund. So it's not going to end up as bad as the red on the right. There's interest earnings that will help offset that to some degree. Next year, Next year's the one that has me concerned. Because the $10.5 million figure I've got there on the bottom for 26 for that credit only represents an 8% increase over the credit from the prior year. The average is much higher. I went a little lower because if you'll think back to what I talked about property tax, your property tax revenue and assessed value typically grows slower in the year after an assessment. So I'm assuming that the tax credit for 2006 will grow at a little bit lower pace than what we have seen. But that does mean we've got to prepare for the next few years to come. The reassessment again. So when we did the reassessment last year, we lowered property taxes from 88.9 mils to 83.4 mils. 5.5 mils. That was a 61.2% decrease. I would like to suggest, maybe that's 61.3. I would like to suggest, it is not included in this budget, but I want you guys to think about it, that if we applied that same rollback to the TDF that we applied to the taxes, it would essentially freeze it at the equivalent rate at what was given before the rollback. So instead of having a tax credit of 67.45%, it would be 61.3%. Instead of the tax credit being 56.3 mils, it would reduce down to 51.1 mils. That would be a cost of $103.05 on a $500,000 home. That's about $20.70 per $100,000 of assessed value. Doing that would not wipe out that whole credit. Negative balance, the deficit. It would leave about $400,000, but again, we get interest on that, so the interest would probably cover it. But by doing that, you'd also just maybe be carrying yourself for another year. Because if we return to the same level of growth of 4% property, and we look back to Mr. Finney's presentation, who's moving here? And who's moving here at higher rates than elsewhere? We'll be having the discussion again in the next year, at the latest the year after. So I've got a few scenarios worked up that we could talk about in later workshops if it's something that council even wants to entertain. You just guide us and let us know. Questions?
Are there other options?
Property tax millage increase, business license fee increase. I mean, you would have to, well, either that or not even that, okay? You continue to freeze services at the level that they are. Because when you're not having a revenue source come in, we'll be reducing property. We're reducing those property taxes by that credit. So we're going to reduce the revenue that comes in from property taxes. So do we reduce expenses somewhere else? Or do we generate revenue from some other source? They could be.
Do what possibly, sorry?
The hospitality tax fund balances could some of that be?
But that's a temporary fix.
It is.
Because that's doing exactly what we talk about. You don't use one-time revenue for recurring expenses. Could they be used in this year and possibly in next year just to give us time to decide what you want to do in the following year? Absolutely. But it would have to be recognized as a short-term solution as we decide what that number actually needs to be.
We can't continue to lose money on the tax credit in the tourism development fee. It has to change. the point of the 20% of the tourism development fee was that some of it went back to homeowners, some of it went to the city for tourism-focused infrastructure. Now we're having negative money for tourism-focused infrastructure from the TDF. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the law actually said 20% of the 20%, only 20% of the 20% is mandated for tax relief. So 80% of the 20% actually was initially available for any other tourism-related projects.
Yeah, so this has to change drastically, probably more than you just mentioned.
Yeah. That's right.
Michelle, is it an option to possibly use some of the hospitality funds to get us through the summer season to see what kind of season we actually have and to revisit this in the fall, September, October?
The challenge with that is in early August, I have to have these rates and fees to the auditor, and they are programming to put the tax bills out by October. So it's not really an option for us to do that if we wanted to consider it for, the tax revenue for this year. Is it an option to carry us over to study it until we get to FY27? Yes, but it will do us no good for FY26.
I think what Mr. Smith is talking about is looking at an actual long-term solution, a long-term strategy.
Yes.
And that would be
That's what we
ideal.
should be looking at.
I mean, with the type of
Decision
growth
city
that we're
council make.
seeing, we have to
Yeah,
do
no,
something.
I know. But we make it with
Yeah.
the input of the team members.
Absolutely.
But I think Greg is right.
We can't continue down this path.
No, we can't continue to put a Band-Aid on a wound that keeps continuing to bleed.
I think we're not going to iron this out here. I think we do need, even if it's multiple dedicated workshops, to looking at this and studying it and weighing what all of our options are and what the different scenarios are with TDF. And, I agree with what Greg and Bill are saying. We have to do something. We knew this day was coming. That 20% was not going to cover us forever, with the type of growth we're seeing. So we have to do something.
I think in 2009, I believe it was, when the TDF was created, I don't think anybody at that time, because at that time, it was 80%. And when it started, and I don't think anybody, member of council at that time, that was the year before I got elected, but I don't think anybody in staff, anybody in council imagined that we would have the growth that we've had in the last 20, 25 years.
That's right. We weren't having any growth in 2009, that's why.
Well, I get that, I understand it completely. And the whole purpose behind the TDF was to put money out in a pot that we could actually use to do tourism stuff along with. Mm-hmm. And the buy-in was to have the 80% tax reduction on a primary homeowner's property, house. But I believe at that time, I don't think anybody realized that within 16, 17 years, it would grow Myrtle Beach proper, so to speak, this road to the point it is today with the amount of houses, 4% properties, especially that have been built. And so I was just sitting here thinking, wow, from 80% down to 56, is that right now? That's just absolutely amazing. And Greg, Bill, I think we all understand that what's going to happen. We can't continue down this road. We have to find a path that will work. And that could be a possible option, is to see if that could be increased through the TDF itself to where we would possibly get more funding for that. Which that would be a big hill to climb to start with. But that is an option to take a look at.
That could also be a dangerous hill.
Oh, there's no question about that. I don't know how many times we've all talked about it. Leave well enough alone.
Well, we'll put together some scenarios for you and talk through it. I think the beauty of it is, yes, it's a difficult hill, and it's something that nobody wants to do. But Fox pointed out our next lowest tax millage in the state of a competitor is Hilton Head, and it's 15 mils higher than us. Mount Pleasant. We have room to move and still be one of the lower municipalities in the state of South Carolina. But we'll work on that. We'll put something together and bring it back to you, talk about some different scenarios, and figure out what needs to be done by the time we pass the budget.
But the pie is, we keep slicing, we keep giving more people a piece of the pie, and we're trying to keep the pieces the same size.
Right.
And that doesn't work because you run out of pie.
Yes.
And that's not good,
Right.
Or the slice gets so thin you can't see
But
it.
we're not making the slices thinner. We're keeping the slices the same size, and that's
Right.
the problem. We can make the slices thinner, and we're gonna have to make the slices thinner.
We're going out and buying a pie with our own
But
money.
you're eventually gonna run out of pie. So that's why the long-term solution is what we need to focus on, whatever that might be, because we just don't know at this point.
Right.
Downside, obviously, all what Michelle said about taxing and village increase, that's applied to all classes, commercial, residential, or probably commercial do not benefit from this piece.
And that's something we've done in the past with the millage increase. We've increased the tourism development fee credit, which just makes the inequity larger.
Correct. I wouldn't say good or bad, I'm just saying that.
It's bad.
Be aware. Be aware.
Yeah.
We
Michelle,
felt-
just a question, going back to these workshops. I'm not implying at all that we don't trust you and your team and management at all. But are there other people, experts, we should bring into this conversation with us as we look at these different options?
We
Is that something
can.
to think about?
I think the expertise, I believe, would be more on, forecasting, and they would bring their own knowledge for that as far as ways to cut expenses,
Yeah, and I guess to that point, the forecast is the area where we're relying on other people.
Mm-hmm.
But the math itself, the math, the scenario is as simple as what Greg said.
Yeah.
Like, the challenging part is being able to predict the rate of growth in the 4% property owners. And that's where we have not seen a light at the end of the tunnel. We continue to see, we are seeing, we're not just seeing the increase in new construction of 4%, we're seeing the conversion of 6% to 4% at a higher rate too. Right? So it's not just that the new houses getting built are getting occupied by full-time residents. It's properties that have historically been second homes or rental houses are getting converted to 4%.
And the assessed
That's the
value
part.
is so much more. I mean, the
Right.
growth, the inflation in real estate, the cost.
So
And that's at age 62 and above, you know, that were smart enough to.
I wasn't gonna throw stones, but yes, sir, you're right.
That's right. I'm in that class, big time. But that's what's happening too, you're right. They're, you know, they made an investment in a condo for $25,000, it's now worth $300,000. This is where they're gonna retire, and they want our services as well.
And it's been a second home for 20 years, and now it's their primary.
Exactly.
We're seeing that at a more elevated pace.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's something that I don't know that we can accurately predict.
Now, the pandemic did escalate that a lot. You know, a lot of folks who had been planning to move here in the next 10 years, you know, the world changed and they said, you know what, I'm coming now. So you saw, I think, growth in 1 year at like 20%, which is unusual. The thing is, it's slowed down since then, but not a lot. Not a lot.
We've gone from 6 million in credit in 2020 to close to 10 million in credit in 2025.
Is that right? Oh, yeah, right.
And if you think about that credit at the beginning, I think when we first started, we credited 100% of the operating mills that we had at that time. We only had 6, we might have had some other millage on there at the time. Debt service might have been 7 something. But anyway, you know, it was 100% of operating millage when it was initially happening. And that's the growth. We knew that we would not resolve this here at retreat. We absolutely did. We wanted it to be a topic of discussion and a time for you to give us some direction on what you want us to do and bring back to you over the course of the next few workshops before we do finalize the budget. And I think we've been given that direction. Okay. This is just sort of to reiterate, I talked about before, if we were to have more revenue than expected come into the general fund before year end, these were Fox's priorities, the city manager's priorities of the things that we would do to utilize that funding first. The restore the full funding for the police take-home car program, add that PRSD landscape crew. I think, you know, Mike Louder, that was one of the things you've talked about a lot, and increasing the level of that landscaping maintenance, sidewalks, right-of-ways, those areas. A graphic designer to help with, we're going to be getting a new website. We've got this branding, and we don't want to invest in that product and not have someone on board to keep it going, keep it flowing, and to be spread throughout the entire organization. The records retention clerk, I think we talked a little bit about that yesterday. And then secondly, a benefits manager. Someone to help work even more closely on managing, operating, monitoring our health insurance program. Because we've seen where that is right now. That concludes my presentation, so questions or other items for discussion? And not to end on a negative note, this is a really great budget. It really is. We've said it a couple times, and we're not saying it just trying to say it enough to make you believe it. It really is. Thank you.
three changes we've alluded to already. We're going to start with Janet and looking at some of the water, sewer, stormwater, solid waste. You're up.
All right. So this is a companion presentation to what Michelle shared with you earlier. There really aren't any additional surprises. She went over the highlights, but just as a reminder, we had a series of consultant rate studies. Back in 2021, we had our stormwater and our water and sewer rate study, and in 23 there was an update to water and sewer, and then also in 23 we had our solid waste rate study. And just remember, this is an industry best practice to re-examine these rates on a frequent basis. You know, we're making sure that we're minimizing customer impacts. We're allowing for a leveled revenue adjustments, and just to make sure that we're maintaining funding for our operation and maintenance and capital improvement needs. But some of the challenges, again, the same things you're hearing over and over again during retreat, is that inflation is impacting our labor market, is impacting our material supply chains still. We have external factors such as the Horry County Solid Waste Authority. Their rates are adjusting, as well as the wholesale water and sewer charges from Grand Strand Water and Sewer. We also have capital investment costs that are going up for replacement equipment and vehicles, construction by contractor projects. And we just want to make sure that our current levels end up covering our O&M and capital expenses. All right, so we'll jump right into water and sewer. You'll notice Grand Strand Water and Sewer is increased per 1,000 gallons. It says per gallon there, it's per 1,000 gallons. About 7 cents for water treatment, and then 6 and 8 cents for wastewater treatment increase going into this next year. As far as our rates for our customers, there's a 9% increase in water and sewer rates. And that has if you consider an average household of 7,500 gallons, that's a blended increase of around $5.76 per household. And if you look to the far left here, I know we've talked a lot about, you know, where are we with the different jurisdictions? How do we measure up? We're kind of right in the middle right now. If you see in the blue, that is our new rate for water and sewer for that average household, residential household. And you can see we've had some conversation about Mount Pleasant. So they're up there at $142 compared to our $69.75. So we are considerably lower than them. Uh-oh. I went backwards, sorry. All right, so stormwater. We have a 22% increase in the rate, moving from $13.85 to $16.89, a $3.04 increase. For a household, that is a $36.48 increase for the year. If you take into consideration a restaurant, about a half-acre size property, that's about a $10.82 increase per month for $129.87 for a half-acre property. And then if you have a larger parcel, like a 16-acre hotel, you're about $345 for the month, and rounding out to $4,151 for the year of a change. And not everybody calculates their stormwater management fee the same. For us, an equivalent residential unit is 5,000 square feet. So over on the far left is that comparison table again, and shows you that we're right in the middle with our partners in Surfside and North Myrtle Beach. If you look at Charleston area, going back to that Mount Pleasant area, they are at $25 per ERU.
Let me ask you a question real quick.
maybe.
On the,
Sorry.
sorry about that.
No, it went really quick. Hold on.
That's okay.
Sorry about that.
For residential, on the calculation of 5,000 square feet, are you talking about lot size? So, for some of those smaller communities where there is, the lots are a little bit smaller, they're gonna pay the same rate?
It's a standard for the residential property. It's usually 1 ERU for a residence.
Okay, so the homes in the Golf Village, in the Grand Dunes PUD, that are, some of them are half acre, some of them are 3/4 of an acre, they're still gonna pay
One
the same
ERU.
rate as one equivalent. What a deal.
All right, so jumping forward to solid waste. The Solid Waste Authority just recently had a budget meeting at the end of February, and we were able to get a glimpse of what they're proposing to increase for July 1 and their tipping fees. It's not finalized just yet. They still have to, I think, have another board meeting on it. But we wanted to bring that forward as soon as we knew the information. But the garbage tipping fee is going to be increasing by $3, and yard is staying the same, but bulk is jumping $12. So it's going to be the same tipping rate as our garbage rate. So how does this impact our residential customer? It'll be an increase of $1.04 per month to $32.85, and then an annual adjustment of $12.48. And the table to the left, again, compares some of our local municipalities and their solid waste services. And you can see how we provide weekly services for garbage, recycle, yard waste, and bulk waste, and not all of the participants in that table do the same. So the $32.85 is our new value, and again, we're right in the mid-range, but as you compare us to some of the private companies like a GFL or a Resolve, you can see that we are significantly lower and offer a tremendous amount of value to our residents. All right, and that's all I have for y'all. If you have any questions for me?
Janet,
Yes.
looking at our water rates and stormwater, historically, because I'm looking at how much lower we are than a lot of other municipalities. Historically, why do we have such a large gap? Why did we not go up year after year, or
I think that is
as much as others did?
it's probably a better question for our financial team to answer that question. What the consultant evaluates.
Yeah, well, we bring in a consultant to ask, to provide for us the most conservative rates possible. And I'll just say it like this. Our former administration was a much more conservative administration, not just the city manager, but even the directors. They did not like to ask for more people. They did more maintenance and renovation and large-scale improvements. And to give them a little credit, at the time, the size of the improvements we needed were not as large. We're just coming into the fact that right now we're needing a 48-inch parallel line come through. In my time here in 20 years, we've only done one major line like that. In the past, we were able to renovate pump stations as opposed to replacing. But after so many years of renovating pump stations, you're going to get to a point where you eventually got to replace the whole thing. So they weren't necessarily facing the same challenges we were. And as always, every council and everyone I've worked with in the city of Myrtle Beach has always wanted to minimize the impact on our rating taxpayers as much as possible. So with all of those things combined, the rates were only raised to the extent absolutely necessary to meet the much lower costs at that time. We're not able to maintain those levels anymore. The city's grown, the demands have grown, our system is aging, and it needs more replacement, and unfortunately that's happening at a time when cost is escalating exponentially.
They get a ton of credit historically for being able to duct tape things together and maintain and keep kicking the can. But to Michelle's point, it just only lasts so long.
That's not always good.
It's not sustainable.
And we're significantly lower. It's not just a little bit, it's significant.
And I can tell you from very close personal experience, my father was the electrical supervisor for the pump stations very way back. And he was a master electrician, and he could go in and rebuild your control panel and those types of things. But even at that, you can only do it so long, and finding master electricians to come and work those positions with those skills, it's more difficult nowadays.
Now you need a Wi-Fi enabled control station.
That's right.
All right,
Questions? Any other questions?
any questions?
Do match the button, okay. All right, good morning, all. Here to talk the proposed planning and zoning department fee changes and updates to our fee schedule here. I'd like to quickly start and just acknowledge a few people. This is a team effort to pull this all together, so Charlie Rao here with me, Ken May, Matt Brooks, and Taisha Roldan in our department, and then also special thank you to Michelle and Marla for looking at this with us a few times and giving us some feedback for it. 5 sections to go through today. Talk the new application categories, our realignments, the removed application categories, our fee increases, the benchmarking, and then also a quick discussion on our projected revenue generation based on previous year's numbers. So to start with, it was labeled new. I just want to be very clear. We're not creating any new fees at this time. The fees that we have here up in front of you are already charged. They're just charged by separate ordinance. So in sake of clarity, we're moving these fees onto the planning and zoning fee sheet. This would include our oceanfront encroachments, both hard and soft encroachments, along with our sidewalk cafe encroachment. I do want to make note here that, as previously discussed, the oceanfront parking encroachment, which was previously viewed as a soft encroachment, into next year will be viewed and charged as a hard encroachment. So that's the one change there. In terms of our removals, the theme that we're really trying to go for is more of a streamlining and making more clear, removing away our variable costs. So in terms of the new PUD fee, keeping the fee at $2,500, but removing the $1,000 per applicant continuance, that variable cost. Again, with our PUD amendments, we'll talk the base rate fee increase that we're looking for, but in this case, we're removing that actual noticing cost, any of that variable costing. Cleaning up our annexation language here, the way it was previously written implied that rezoning was free. What it truly meant was when you came in to annex a property, the rezoning accompanying that was not a separate charge. We're just cleaning that up to say it does not impose annexation for clarity's sake. We're removing our base map fee. This was a charge when people would come in and request to have a fully printed map. Everything's gone digital at this point. We just have not been seeing those requests. And then finally, the restrictive covenant penalty. We have not been seeing any restrictive covenant enforcement coming in the door, so we're just going to be removing that as well for clarity's sake. Talk our fee increases. Our text amendment, we're seeking a $300 increase to align with our rezoning fee at $500. These are both development ordinance changes, just to put them in line with one another. Leaving the rezoning fee at $500, so seeking no base fee change at this point. The PUD amendment, seeking a $250 base fee increase with the removal of that variable cost. The $250 increase there is we get letters that we have to send out. Sometimes it costs $50, sometimes it costs $400, seeking that kind of middle ground to cover that with just a straight base fee increase of $250.
Cameron?
Yes, sir.
Real quick, on the PUD fee, should the city decide to amend the PUD, will the city pay those fees?
Historically, we don't charge when the city makes a motion to do something. For our encroachments, both residential and commercial, we're simplifying the fee to a single rate at the higher amount. So $250 for our residential encroachment and $600 for commercial encroachment. Seeking a $50 base fee increase for minor subdivisions, $150 base fee increase for major subdivisions. Our street naming, we're simplifying to a singular flat fee at the mid-range of $50 per street name, with plat stampings going to a simplified singular fee of $50. Our re-review of plats, we're going from a mishmash of what step you're on in the re-review process to the first and second review being free, with the third and subsequent reviews being an increase of $100. Including here a zoning certificate. This will cover both our zoning letter requests that we receive as well as our temporary use permits, and setting that at $25. Our signed plan check fee, previously there was a variable cost associated with this. This previously had been changed, and a placeholder fee had been left in the chart at $15 with the understanding that at a future date we would go in and seek an increase for that. So seeking a $35 base fee increase for that, and then a $250 base fee increase for our Board of Zoning Appeals requirements. Looking at our benchmark, I used Conway, North Myrtle Beach, Charleston, Panama City, Florida, Daytona Beach, Florida, Horry County, and Charleston County as my comparatives. I want to make note that the column for the City of Myrtle Beach base fee is what we're requesting to go to. The benchmark in the middle is the aggregate of those communities that I just listed. So in this case, our text amendments and our rezonings, we would be below the benchmark average. PUDs and PUD amendments, we are above the benchmark average there. With residential encroachments and commercial encroachments, we're above the benchmark average. I want to pump the brakes on that one. During my benchmark study, there's only one other municipality that charged a flat fee for residential or commercial encroachment. That was Charleston County. Charleston County, again, it's the only one. Daytona Beach charged a $4.50 per linear foot. It's hard to model into the equation. I called all the other municipalities and they either do not charge for it or they just simply don't allow it. So that's why that number may look skewed there and a bit higher. For minor subdivisions, we are below the benchmark average. Major subdivisions, substantially below the benchmark average. Street naming, again, below. Plat stamping, marginally higher. Really proud of this one. Board of Zoning Appeals, we hit it right on the nail. Zoning certificate below, temporary use permit below, and signed plan check permit fee is also below. I'm just going to blitz through these. This is just the full analysis that I utilized. And lastly, as noted through many other presentations, benchmarking and predicting revenue in the upcoming years is getting increasingly more difficult with macroeconomic factors. A conservative estimate that we had put together at this time would be between $50,000 and $100,000 revenue increase based on these fees. I'm happy to answer any questions on the planning side. Charlie's here to tackle anything with the zoning side.
Once, twice.
Run, Forrest, run. That's what we got to do for Patrick every time he's in a race. Nickname him Forrest so we can all cheer.
This
This one is much simpler than even Cam's. Obviously, Chris is not here today, and he trusted me to do it, so I just think yes.
His looked much simpler than this.
Just wait and see.
All right.
We recognize over the course of the last couple of years that you could actually build a smaller house and pay a higher building permit fee depending on where you are in the breakdown. So simply we almost contemplated just making this a Scrivener's error change, but we need to make sure that we go through it with you. We're really just adjusting this to make sure that if you're building a $150,000 house, that you don't pay a higher permit than building a $151,000 house. And that's really the extent of what we're talking about here. So these changes are just making sure that there's an equitable charge based on the square footage of the house, which is how we charge for things. You can see from the impact, we really don't even get into any impact at less than $150,000, and then we grow there. So if you're building a $750,000 to $5 million house, you're looking at a change in your permit fee, $1,350. If you're building over a $5 million house, you're seeing a pretty hefty increase there. But obviously, we try to scale this in an effort to make it equitable based off of square footage and making sure that, again, you're not paying a higher fee for a smaller house. And that's essentially what we're talking about. Happy to answer any questions or talk through scenarios there, but again, I know that looks complicated, but it's just my adjustment clear.
I have a question. Going back to the building permits. Years ago, we had a rate of you didn't have to get a permit for anything less than $250, and then we increased that to $1,000. Can't remember exactly when we did that, but we did increase it to $1,000. With the cost of building material, an example, a person wants to build something, and it may take 3 or 4 sheets of plywood, some 2x4s or whatever. It doesn't take much to come up to $1,000 anymore for building material. I put up a privacy fence across my backyard, and my backyard it's bigger than a lot of backyards, but it's not huge. But just the material alone for that was $900. I got the receipt, $992. And so I'm just saying, should we or could we look at an increase there? Because a lot of people, homeowners like myself, will do work like that, and they're not going to get a contractor to do it. They're going to do it themselves. We did this increase based on the cost of building material from $250 to $1,000. Should we look at that in a way to kind of help our homeowners? I'm just saying $1,000. It doesn't take much to spend $1,000 on some material.
Agreed, and we will do whatever you tell us to do. But I would give you one thing to consider, and then one step we will take. So the thing to consider is we still have to send somebody out there to do the inspection, right?
I understand that.
We need to make sure that we're accounting for that. What I would tell you is let us go back and pull the numbers on how many of those smaller permits we have to do on a regular basis, and that can inform sort of where a natural break point can be. And if you don't want to look at that, we're happy to consider that.
I just want to throw that out for consideration.
And I'm sure this wasn't the case with your fence, but I will tell you, a lot of the DIY projects that we go inspect, we end up having to go there more than once. And so the smaller the project, the more often we have to go back out and really make sure that it's being done correctly. So there is a real cost to the city for us doing any of those inspections. So a lot of things, the smaller ones tend
Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?